On Monday, I published the first short story in my novella, and we are going to use that to talk about first lines, tension leaks, and story grid genres. Here, when I set out to first write this novella, I was giving each character their own story grid genre. Now, story grid doesn't break things into like fantasy, historical fiction, mystery. I mean, they do, but they go a lot more in depth with it. And so I was trying to focus on what they call the like internal genres, or I think it's the internal genres, which you could also think of, I believe, as character arcs. So one of the character arcs they have is worldview, which is basically about seeing meaning and like learning new meaning in the world. So this story, which is Laura's, her name is Laura O'Donnell, figured out her last name. This is a worldview revelation story, which means the character arc, the main character goes from ignorance to knowledge. To keep breaking it down, the core event here is that of like our overarching story for the full novella is that Noah is born. That's her son and the person who's going to kind of go through the whole story with us. And it's an ignorance to knowledge story. So the main character is learning something new. Now this is going to be a very spoilery video because I'm talking about craft. If you haven't read the story, I really suggest pausing. It's only like 2,000 words. Go read it on Substack, it's linked below, nice and short, very free, and then come on back. And it will make a lot more sense and a lot like easier, sort of the craft talk. So I knew from the beginning, and this is like, I'm looking at my very initial notes for this story right now. And I wrote, Laura is going to realize her husband is an alcoholic and she's going to take strength from her new baby. I always like to work when I'm looking at story grid. So you have your 5 commandments of storytelling in story grid. So you have your inciting incident, progressive complication, crisis, climax, and revolution. And the first thing I really got here from like Laura is going to realize her husband is an alcoholic and the core event of Noah's born, I kind of put those together and figured out the crisis was going to be, does she accept the knowledge and like take control of her life and say like, all right, I'm gonna do this by myself, I'm gonna do it, or does she just like kind of wallow in despair? It's again something of an internal crisis, but it's something of an internal story. It's a Christmas story, and it's a small Christmas story, family Christmas story. So overall, our inciting incident, to break it down into the 5 commandments, our inciting incident is that Laura's water breaks. Our progressive complication, she can't get a hold of her husband, she's in pain, she has no one to watch Sky, she can't drive. And then she calls her mom, who's like, you have to go to the hospital, but she doesn't want to go to the hospital without her husband. And this is all happening at Thanksgiving, so there's people who are supposed to be coming for Thanksgiving, and she's like, we have to cancel. And they say things about, oh, you're having a baby, is Rob bringing the car around, that like really make her feel bad. And so she calls the bar down the street and she says, hi, is my husband there? And he is drunk, and she's like, oh God. And so that's when she gets to her crisis of like, does she lose it? Does she freak out? Does she get really mad? Like, what does she do? Or does she like take control of the situation and kind of find her power and her strength and keep going? The climax is she finds her power and her strength, and in the resolution, she has a beautiful baby, and she's like, things are gonna be okay. So it's quite a big change that she goes through in this like, I don't know, 24-hour period. The story is set kind of in like a few hours, and then we have a little bit of a time skip at the very end. Now, the hardest thing about this story I found, in it being a revelation story, was the naivete of the character. So and this comes to our first lines. So when I first wrote the story, I published it or put it on Scribophile to get some feedback. The first line was originally, I moved to America because I was in love. Someone said that was a bit cliche. I hate it. That's like my least favorite criticism to get. I guess like I'll take anything, but if someone says it's cliche, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna change it, because if you think it's cliche, like it probably is, because it means you've heard it before. And then the people reading the story basically said the plot twist doesn't come as a surprise at all in terms of the husband like being an alcoholic there. And they said, you know, the trope itself is of a faithless husband, and pregnant wife is very common. And so the thing was like, this is a boring story, like it's nicely written, but there's nothing new here. And then later on, somebody also said, hey, like the character is very naive. Like when she find out like he's not where he's supposed to be, you know, the immediate reader thought is he's having an affair. And it's hard to imagine the thought wouldn't cross her mind. And it didn't originally. So at that point, I ended up changing, because I got the feedback about it being cliche, I ended up changing the line to something to the effect of, when my husband runs out for cranberry sauce, I know there's like a 70-30 chance he stops at a bar to get a drink. Now the problem with that first line is it is a massive tension leak, because the revelation is supposed to be about the husband drinking. If she already knows that he is, then, and she says that at the very beginning, then there's no surprise. And that is a huge lesson I learned from CC Lyra, which is like your character should always be surprised. Things they don't, if they expect something to happen and then that happens, that's extremely boring. And that was what happened in the first line and the second version of the story. Was I just said this is what she expected, and then what she expected happened. And so I had these two problems. I had my character was super naive, and I had my character, I was leaking the tension by basically saying the revelation at the beginning. It had to be new information. It had to be new. It had to be a revelation for the story to work. And so what I ended up doing in my most recent revision is like to get rid of the tension leak. Again, CC Lyra is great for this. If you don't listen to the shit no one tells you about writing, I highly recommend. But she always says like people have theories. When there's something they don't know, they have theories about what it is. They have theories about what's going on. I needed my character to have a theory. And because everyone was like, well, obviously like it's a trope, he's having an affair, I had my character think her husband was having an affair. And then, interestingly, she's kind of okay with that. She's kind of okay with the affair, which is an interesting twist on a character, because she is very kind of hardened about it. She's like, he's having an affair, but it's going to be okay because I'm pregnant now. I'm going to have the baby. And as soon as I have the baby, he will be back to normal. He will forget about her. He will be back to our family life. And as long as I don't get pregnant again, everything will be fine. Like, you know, she's like, sex life goes out the window. Things go out the window when you're going to have a baby. And she's like, it's a really strong misbelief that she has there. And it's a very obviously negative and not true one. Maybe not true. I don't know. She believes it anyways. And I was like, okay, maybe that's a little naive, or maybe that's a little like insensitive. But I was hoping, my hope was that by saying that, by having her have the misbelief of like, the misbelief isn't, oh, my husband's perfect. The misbelief is my husband's having an affair, but it's all going to be fine as soon as I have this baby. So the new first line was, standing at the sink on Thanksgiving morning, there are 3 things I know to be true. The baby is kicking, the turkey guts are leaking, and my husband is having an affair. So I moved to America because I was in love, which is like backstory, passive, not particularly interesting and cliche, to when my husband runs out for cranberry sauce, I know there's a 70-30 chance or something like that, that he's going to stop at a bar, to standing at the sink on Thanksgiving morning, there are 3 things I know to be true. The baby is kicking, the turkey guts are leaking, and my husband is having an affair. And then later on, she gets into it. She's like, he's been doing this for weeks. He's been half completing errands, running out to finish them later. He's certainly finishing someone, I'll give him that. And so I hope that fixed the problem. I hope making the character not naive, but instead like very kind of hardened and even cynical about it, but just kind of fixed the story and made the revelation more impactful, better, a bit of a better twist there. I hope it did anyways. That was my hope. And I also got rid of that tension leak because he's not really having an affair. And for her, for this particular character, what's actually happening is worse than what the theory that she had in her head. So the story, things just keep getting worse. So I think it escalates fairly well. So that is sort of the story, the transformation behind that story. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this one, and especially your own experience in writing. Have you ever gone back to your work and been like, well, that's a massive tension leak? I do it a lot. I'll be like, everything's fine. Like, there's nothing to be worried about. Like, this is what my character is thinking. Partially it's believability, I think, that we do that, but you see it a lot. It's like, no, you can't say there's no danger. No, make it go away. Take that out. There's always danger. There's always has to be tension. Even if your character is saying to themselves it's going to be fine, it has to be really, really obvious in their interiority that they're just trying to convince themselves that it's going to be fine, and it's not actually going to be fine. Yeah, I do that a lot, and I see that in a lot of other people's work as well. Also, first lines are tricky, and it's hard to get them right. I think you never get them right the first time. I'm happy where this one ended. I kind of like a little bit more of a voicey first line, especially like first line of the whole novella, much less the first line of the short story. And I think it is helpful for the genre too, because it's the revelation worldview genre. And so she's saying what she knows, and then the revelation counteracts that exactly, which is a fun time. So thank you so much for watching. Again, story is linked below if you want to check it out. Let me know your thoughts, your craft thoughts, the challenges you've had with your own writing in this sort of first line tension leak genre area, and I will see you next time with another video.